The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was restocking shelves at Henderson's hardware store. My hands were dusty from organizing screws and bolts when my phone buzzed against my hip. Unknown number. I almost let it ring, but something made me answer. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Sarah? Sarah Mitchell? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. Speaking. This is Colonel Patricia Hayes from Fort Braxton. I'm calling about your father, Staff Sergeant David Mitchell. My blood went cold. Dad had been deployed for 8 months. The calls you never want to receive always start like this. Is he? I couldn't finish the sentence. He's alive, Miss Mitchell, but he's been wounded. We're flying him to Walter Reed Medical Center tomorrow. He's asking for you. The words hit me like a physical blow. Dad was hurt, and he wanted me there. Not my perfect sister Jessica with her law degree and corner office. Not my brother Marcus with his engineering job and pristine credit score. Me. The burden. The disappointment. The one who couldn't even hold down a retail job without getting my schedule cut. I'll be there, I said, without hesitation. Colonel Hayes gave me the details of flight information, visiting hours, contact numbers. I scribbled everything on the back of a receipt, my hands shaking slightly. When I hung up, my manager Ron was standing behind me with his arms crossed. Family emergency, I said before he could speak. Sarah, you've already used up your sick days, and we're short-staffed this week. My father's been wounded in Afghanistan. I'm going to see him. Ron's expression softened slightly, but business was business. I understand, but if you leave now, I can't guarantee your position will be here when you get back. I untied my red apron and handed it to him. Then I guess I don't have a position. The bus ride from Millfield, Ohio to Washington, D.C. took 14 hours. 14 hours to think about the last conversation I'd had with Dad before his deployment. We'd been sitting on the porch of his small rental house, the one he moved into after Mom died 3 years ago. Jessica and Marcus had been there too, along with their spouses and children. Everyone gathered for what we all knew might be a final goodbye. Sarah's 26 and still working retail, Jessica had said, not bothering to lower her voice. When are you going to stop enabling her, Dad? Marcus nodded in agreement. She needs to figure out how to stand on her own 2 feet. You can't keep bailing her out every time she loses a job or can't make rent. I'd wanted to defend myself, to explain that I'd been taking care of Mom during her cancer treatment while they were building their careers, that I'd spent 2 years sleeping in hospital chairs and missing work to drive her to chemotherapy appointments, that the reason I couldn't hold steady employment wasn't laziness or incompetence, but the fact that I'd been grieving and struggling with depression since Mom's death. But Dad had just looked tired of mediating between his children, tired of the family dynamics that never seemed to improve. Sarah's doing her best, he'd said quietly. We all are. Her best isn't good enough, Jessica had replied. She's 30 pounds overweight, working a dead-end job, and living in that tiny apartment with the broken air conditioning. She's a burden, Dad, to all of us. The word had hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Burden. Not struggling, not grieving, not trying. Burden. Dad hadn't contradicted her. Now pressed against the window of a Greyhound bus, I realized that might have been the last real conversation I'd have with him. The thought made my chest tight with panic. What if he died thinking I was nothing more than dead weight in the family? What if those were the last words he'd heard about his youngest daughter? I had used the last $300 in my checking account for the bus ticket and a small duffel bag from Walmart. Everything I owned fit into that bag. My clothes, a phone charger, a worn copy of the things they carried that Dad had given me years ago, and a photo of Mom holding me when I was 8 years old. The bus pulled into Union Station at 6:47 a.m. I'd never been to Washington, D.C. before. The scale of everything overwhelmed me. The marble columns, the vaulted ceilings, the constant stream of people who all seemed to know exactly where they were going. I felt small and lost, which wasn't a new feeling, but somehow felt more acute, surrounded by the monuments to American power and prestige. Walter Reed Medical Center was a maze of corridors and security checkpoints, I followed signs and asked directions 3 times before finding the right wing. The elevator smelled like disinfectant and anxiety. When I reached Dad's floor, a nurse directed me to room 314. I stood outside his door for a full minute, trying to prepare myself for what I might see. Through the small window, I could see him lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller than I remembered. His left leg was elevated, wrapped in white bandages. Machines beeped softly around him. When I finally entered, his eyes opened immediately. "Sarah?" His voice was hoarse but warm. "You came." "Of course I came." I pulled a chair close to his bedside. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck carrying explosives," he said with a weak smile. "But I'm alive. That's more than some of my men can say." His face darkened when he said that, and I knew there were stories he wouldn't tell me. Stories that would live in his dreams and wake him up at night for years to come. "The doctors say you're going to be okay," I said, though I wasn't sure if that was true. "Eventually, maybe. The leg is pretty messed up." He shifted slightly, wincing. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about what happened over there." "Dad, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." His eyes met mine, and for the first time in months, I saw him really see me. Not as a disappointment or a burden, but as his daughter. There was an ambush. IED took out our lead vehicle. We were pinned down for hours. I thought we were all going to die. He paused, his breathing shallow. But someone came for us. Someone who shouldn't have been there, who risked everything to get us out. If it weren't for that person, I wouldn't be here talking to you right now. I squeezed his hand gently. I'm glad they were brave enough to help. Dad's expression grew strange, almost confused. The thing is, Sarah, I keep thinking about something. Something that doesn't make sense. Before he could continue, the door opened, and a tall woman in a military dress uniform entered. She had silver stars on her shoulders and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Behind her was Colonel Hayes, who had called me. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell," the woman said. "I'm General Rebecca Stone. I wanted to check on your recovery personally." Dad struggled to sit up straighter. "General Stone, ma'am." "At ease, soldier." She glanced at me briefly. "I don't want to interrupt family time. I'll come back later." "Actually," Dad said, "this is my daughter Sarah, the one I was telling you about." General Stone's eyes fixed on me with sudden intensity, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Sarah Mitchell?" "Yes, ma'am." She continued staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Finally, she nodded once. "Miss Mitchell, your father is a brave man. We're grateful for his service." "Thank you, ma'am." But even as she spoke the polite words, I could see wheels turning behind her eyes. Something was happening that I didn't understand. After they left, Dad turned back to me. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay." 6 months ago, were you in Afghanistan?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "What? Dad? No, I've never been overseas. I've barely been outside of Ohio." He studied my face carefully. "Are you sure? Because there was a medic who saved my unit, someone who pulled me out of that ambush. And I could have sworn." He shook his head. "Never mind, I must be confused from the medication." But I could see in his eyes that he wasn't confused at all. He was remembering something that didn't make sense, something that connected me to a story I'd never heard before. And somehow, I had the feeling that General Stone's strange reaction meant I was about to learn exactly what that story was. The cafeteria at Walter Reed smelled like overcooked vegetables and industrial coffee. I sat alone at a corner table, picking at a sandwich I couldn't taste, when my phone rang. Jessica's name flashed on the screen. "Finally," she said without preamble. "Marcus and I have been trying to reach you for 2 days. Where are you?" A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Washington, at the hospital with Dad. A pause. "You flew to Washington? Sarah, how did you even afford that?" "I took the bus. And I quit my job." "You what?" Her voice pitched higher. "Sarah, you can't just abandon your responsibilities every time there's a crisis. This is exactly what we mean when we say you're impulsive and..." "Dad was wounded in Afghanistan, Jessica. He asked for me." "He asked for all of us. But Marcus and I can't just drop everything. We have careers, mortgages, children to think about. We have real obligations. Real obligations. As if caring for our dying mother for 2 years hadn't been real. As if sitting beside Dad's hospital bed wasn't real. "I'll call you later," I said, and hung up. The truth was, I'd been the family disappointment long before Mom got sick. It started in high school when I chose art classes over advanced placement courses. Jessica had been valedictorian, Marcus salutatorian. I graduated with a 3.2 GPA and a portfolio of paintings nobody understood. "Art isn't practical, Sarah," Dad had said gently when I'd talked about art school. "Maybe you could study education, teach art to kids." But I'd seen the look in his eyes, the same look I'd seen when Marcus announced his acceptance to MIT when Jessica got into Harvard Law. Pride mixed with surprise, like he couldn't quite believe he'd produced children capable of such achievements. When he looked at me, there was only worry. So I'd enrolled in community college for general studies, dropped out after a semester, and started working retail. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I figured out what I really wanted to do. That was 8 years ago. When Mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, everything changed overnight. Jessica was in her second year at a prestigious law firm in Chicago. Marcus had just started working for an aerospace company in Seattle. Both had significant others, busy social lives, important projects they couldn't abandon. I was working part-time at a department store and living in a studio apartment above a pizza shop. My schedule was flexible, my life was dispensable. "Sarah can handle the day-to-day stuff," Jessica had announced during one of our family conference calls. "She's got the time, and honestly, Mom responds better to her anyway." It wasn't entirely untrue. Mom did respond better to me, but not because I was more caring or compassionate. It was because I was there. Every chemotherapy appointment, every sleepless night when the pain medications weren't working, every doctor's visit where we learned the treatments weren't shrinking the tumors. Jessica visited twice during Mom's 18-month battle. Marcus came home for Thanksgiving and stayed 3 days. They both flew in for the funeral, stayed for the service and the reception, then left the next morning to return to their important lives. I was the one who cleaned out Mom's apartment, who sold her furniture and donated her clothes. I was the one who held Dad while he cried in her empty bedroom, who helped him sort through 40 years of marriage reduced to boxes of photographs and keepsakes. But somehow, in the family narrative, I became the one who, quote, couldn't handle responsibility, the one who used Mom's illness as an excuse to avoid growing up, the one who was stuck in a rut and needed to get her act together. The worst part was that I'd started to believe them. After Mom's funeral, I'd tried to rebuild my life. I'd gotten a job at a local bank, even started taking evening classes in business administration. But grief doesn't follow a schedule. And depression doesn't care about your career goals. Some days I could barely get out of bed, let alone pretend to be interested in loan applications and account balances. I lasted 6 months before my supervisor suggested I might be happier in a less demanding environment. Code for, "You're too sad to work here." That's when the family interventions started. Jessica would call with job listings and life advice. Marcus would send me self-help books and articles about taking control of your destiny. Dad would slip me money for rent and groceries, then worry aloud to his friends about his daughter, who just couldn't seem to get her life together. They meant well, but their help felt like pity. Their concern sounded like disappointment. Their love came wrapped in expectations I couldn't meet. The breaking point came 6 months before Dad's deployment. We'd all gathered for his 54th birthday at a restaurant in downtown Columbus. Jessica had driven down from Chicago with her husband Robert and their twin boys. Marcus had flown in from Seattle with his fiancée Amanda. I'd taken 2 buses to get there because my car had broken down the week before and I couldn't afford the repairs. "So Sarah," Robert had said over appetizers, "what's your plan? You can't work retail forever." Quote, "I'm looking into some online certification programs," I'd lied. "Medical coding, maybe web design." "Those are good fields," Amanda had added encouragingly. "Very stable." But Jessica had that look on her face, the one she got in courtrooms when she was about to demolish a witness. Sarah, you've been looking into things for 3 years now. At some point, you have to actually do something. Jess, Dad had warned quietly. No, Dad, we need to talk about this. She'd turned to face me directly. You're 26 years old. You don't have a career, you don't have a degree, you don't have a savings account or a retirement plan, or any kind of future strategy. You live paycheck to paycheck in a place that barely qualifies as an apartment. Jessica, Marcus had said, but she was on a roll. And every time things get difficult, you fall apart. When Mom got sick, instead of finding ways to contribute financially to her care, you just gave up on everything else. You used her illness as an excuse to stop trying. The words had hit me like physical blows. Around us, other families were celebrating birthdays and anniversaries, laughing over shared meals. At our table, silence had settled like ash. That's enough, Dad had said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it, though? Jessica had continued. Because we're all here celebrating your birthday. But we're also all worried about what happens to Sarah when you're deployed. Who's going to make sure she doesn't get evicted? Who's going to help her when she loses another job? Who's going to be her safety net when you're not here? I'll figure it out, I'd whispered. How? You've been figuring it out for 8 years, and you're further behind now than when you started. Robert had tried to change the subject, asking Dad about his upcoming assignment. The twins had gotten restless and needed attention. Amanda had complimented the restaurant's decor, but the damage was done. Later, in the parking lot, Dad had pulled me aside. Don't listen to your sister, he'd said. She doesn't understand what you went through with Mom. But I could see the worry in his eyes, the fear that maybe Jessica was right. Maybe I was a burden that would become someone else's problem once he was gone. I'm proud of you, Sarah, he'd said, but the words felt hollow. You're a good person with a kind heart. That matters more than job titles or bank account balances. I'd wanted to believe him, but kindness doesn't pay rent. Good hearts don't build careers. And being proud of someone doesn't mean you're not disappointed in them. That night, I'd gone home to my tiny apartment and cried until I ran out of tears. Then I'd done something I'd never done before. I'd Googled how to disappear from your family. The search results were about witness protection and escaping abuse, but I'd read them anyway, imagining what it would be like to start over somewhere else. To be someone else. Someone who wasn't a burden. 3 weeks later, Dad had deployed to Afghanistan. We'd spoken on the phone every few weeks. Awkward conversations where I'd pretend my life was improving, and he'd pretend to believe me. He'd tell me about the heat and the sand and the local children who would wave at their convoys. I'd tell him about my job at the hardware store and the online course I was supposedly taking. Neither of us mentioned Jessica's words or the family's expectations or my growing certainty that I was exactly the failure they thought I was. Now, sitting in this hospital cafeteria, I realized that Dad might die thinking his youngest daughter was nothing more than dead weight. That his last memories of me might be colored by shame and worry and the burden of loving someone who couldn't love herself. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Jessica says you're in D.C. Call me. We need to coordinate Dad's care properly. Coordinate Dad's care properly. As if I'd been doing it wrong by simply showing up when he needed me. I turned off my phone and went back to Dad's room, where General Stone was standing beside his bed with a folder in her hands and questions in her eyes that I was beginning to suspect would change everything. Jessica arrived at Walter Reed like she was entering a boardroom prepared for hostile negotiations. Her heels clicked against the polished floors with military precision, her tailored black suit unmarked by the long flight from Chicago. Behind her, Robert carried a leather briefcase and wore the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. I was sitting beside Dad's bed helping him with his lunch when they appeared in the doorway. Dad's face lit up at the sight of his eldest daughter, but I caught the way his smile faltered slightly when he saw the tension in her posture. Daddy, Jessica said, moving to kiss his forehead. We came as soon as we could rearrange our schedules. I'm glad you're here, sweetheart. Dad reached for her hand. Both of you. Quote. Robert nodded politely, but kept his distance from the medical equipment. He'd always been uncomfortable around illness, even something as minor as a cold. How are you feeling? Jessica asked, her voice soft with genuine concern. Better now that my girls are here, Dad said, glancing between us. Jessica's eyes landed on me for the first time since entering the room. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I knew that look. She was cataloging details. My wrinkled clothes that I'd slept in, my unwashed hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, the dark circles under my eyes from 2 nights of sleeping in hospital chairs. Sarah, she said with a tight smile, you look tired. I've been here since Tuesday. Right, she turned back to Dad. Well, we're here now, so you can go get some rest. Maybe a shower. The suggestion hung in the air like an order. Robert was already pulling out his phone, probably checking emails or stock prices, anything to avoid the family dynamics playing out around him. I'm fine, I said. Dad needs proper care coordination, Jessica interrupted. I've already spoken with his doctors about establishing a comprehensive treatment plan. Robert's arranged for us to meet with the hospital's patient advocate tomorrow morning. She opened her purse and pulled out a small notebook, flipping to a page covered in her neat handwriting. I've made a list of questions about his rehabilitation timeline, disability benefits, and long-term care options. We need to be strategic about this. Strategic. Everything was strategy with Jessica. Even Dad's recovery had become a project to be managed efficiently. The doctor said he'll need extensive physical therapy, I offered, and there might be complications with the nerve damage in his leg. Jessica barely glanced at me. Yes, I read his chart. That's why we need to research the best rehabilitation facilities. There's a place in Chicago that specializes in military injuries. We could arrange for him to be transferred there once he's stable. Chicago? Dad looked confused. But that's so far from home. It's close to us, Jessica said matter-of-factly. Robert and I can oversee your care properly. Make sure you're getting the best treatment. The word properly felt like a slap, as if everything I'd been doing for the past 3 days had been somehow inadequate. What about Sarah? Dad asked. She'd want to visit. Jessica and Robert exchanged a look. Of course, Jessica said carefully, though it might be difficult for her to travel regularly, given her situation. My situation. My poverty, she meant. My inability to afford plane tickets or hotel rooms or time off from jobs I probably wouldn't have much longer anyway. A nurse entered to check Dad's vitals, providing a brief respite from the tension. While she worked, Jessica stepped closer to me. We need to talk, she said quietly, privately. We found an empty family consultation room down the hall. Jessica closed the door behind us and immediately crossed her arms. Okay, what's really going on here? What do you mean? I mean, you quit your job and somehow found money for a bus ticket to Washington. You've been here for 3 days without any apparent plan for how you're going to pay your rent or buy groceries when you get home. This is exactly the kind of impulsive decision-making we've talked about. I felt heat rising in my chest. Dad was hurt. He needed me. He needed all of us, but Marcus and I had to arrange coverage at work, reschedule important meetings, find childcare. We had to handle this responsibly. Responsibly, I repeated. You mean you had to make sure your real life didn't get too inconvenienced? Jessica's eyes flashed. My real life? Sarah, I have a caseload of 23 clients depending on me. Robert has a presentation to the board next week that could determine his promotion. Marcus is in the middle of a product launch that represents 2 years of work. What do you have that couldn't wait a few days? The question hit me like a physical blow. What did I have? A job that paid barely above minimum wage, stocking shelves and dealing with customers who treated me like furniture. An apartment so small I could touch both walls with my arms stretched out. A bank account that had been overdrawn more times than I cared to count. Nothing, I said quietly. I have nothing that matters. For a moment, Jessica's expression softened. Sarah, I didn't mean... Yes, you did. I stood up. You've all made it very clear what you think of my life, my choices, me. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time any of you asked how I was doing without immediately following it up with advice about what I should be doing differently? Jessica was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentler but still firm. We worry about you, all of us. You're our sister and we love you, but you have to admit that your track record with decision-making isn't great. My track record, I said. You mean like when I decided to take care of Mom while you were building your career? Or when I decided to hold Dad while he grieved instead of sending him a sympathy card from 3 states away? That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jessica, do you know what I gave up to take care of Mom? I was accepted into a graphic design program at Columbus State. Full scholarship. I deferred for a semester when she got sick, then another, then another. By the time she died, I'd missed my chance. Jessica stared at me. You never told us about the scholarship. Would it have mattered? Would any of you have stepped up to help if you'd known I was sacrificing my future? Or would you have found reasons why your careers were more important? She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. I've spent 3 years listening to all of you tell me I'm a failure, I continued, that I'm a burden, that I need to get my act together. But none of you bothered to ask why I fell apart. None of you cared enough to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I was drowning instead of just being lazy. Sarah, I'm going back to Dad's room, I said, moving toward the door. He actually wants me here. But Jessica caught my arm. Wait, there's something else we need to discuss. Her tone had changed, become more businesslike, more dangerous. What? I've been looking into Dad's benefits, his pension, his insurance policies. Given the extent of his injuries, he's going to need long-term care. Possibly for years. I waited, sensing there was more coming. The thing is, Jessica continued, someone is going to need to be designated as his primary caregiver. Someone who can make medical decisions if he becomes unable to. Someone responsible. The word hung between us like a blade. I've already started the paperwork, she said. Robert knows an attorney who specializes in military benefits. We can have everything arranged within a few days. You want to take over Dad's care. I want to make sure he gets the care he needs. Professional care, not... She gestured vaguely in my direction. Not me. Sarah, be honest. Can you handle this? Really? Can you navigate insurance claims and medical appeals and coordinate with multiple specialists? Can you make sure he gets to every appointment, takes every medication, follows every treatment protocol? The questions felt like accusations. Like a test I was failing even as she asked. I took care of Mom, I said weakly. And look how that turned out. The words hit me like a physical blow. Mom had died. Despite everything I'd done, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the nights I'd spent holding her hand and telling her everything would be okay, she had still died. I need to get back to Dad, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But as I reached for the door handle, Jessica spoke again. There's a military ceremony tomorrow, some kind of honor for Dad's unit. A general is coming to present medals to the wounded soldiers. I turned back to her. What does that have to do with anything? I just think it would be better if the family presented a unified front, professional, put together. Her eyes swept over my appearance again. Maybe you could go back to your hotel room, get cleaned up, buy something appropriate to wear? I'm not staying in a hotel room, Jessica. I've been sleeping in the chair beside Dad's bed. Her expression shifted from annoyance to something that looked almost like pity. Oh, Sarah, of course you have. And in that moment, I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how much I sacrificed or how deeply I loved, I would always be the family disappointment. The burden they had to manage, the problem they had to solve. What I didn't know was that tomorrow's ceremony would change everything. That the general coming to honor Dad's unit would recognize something in me that my own family never had. That sometimes the people who matter most can see what the people closest to you refuse to acknowledge. The Walter Reed Auditorium was packed with dress uniforms, fresh flowers, and the kind of hushed anticipation that comes before important ceremonies. Families clustered in neat rows, children in their Sunday best fidgeting beside parents who kept checking their phones and adjusting their ties. I sat in the back row as far from the stage as possible, wearing the only clean clothes I had left, dark jeans and a navy blue sweater that had seen better days. My hair was pulled back in the same ponytail I'd worn for 3 days, and I'd managed to find a small tube of lip gloss in my purse to at least look minimally presentable. 3 rows ahead of me, Jessica sat with perfect posture in a charcoal gray dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Robert was beside her in a crisp navy suit, occasionally leaning over to whisper something that made her nod with professional seriousness. They looked like they belonged here, among the other military families with their pressed clothes and confident bearing. Marcus had arrived that morning on a red-eye flight from Seattle, bringing Amanda and their coordinated outfits and their ability to fit seamlessly into any situation. He'd hugged me briefly in Dad's hospital room, but I could feel him taking inventory. My appearance, my obvious exhaustion, the way I seemed to shrink when Jessica started outlining her care coordination plans. "You should sit with us," Jessica had said before the ceremony, but it was the kind of invitation that felt more like an obligation than genuine inclusion. "I'm fine back here," I'd replied, and she hadn't insisted. Now, watching the backs of their heads as they chatted quietly with other families, I felt like I was observing my own life from the outside. Like I was a stranger who had somehow wandered into someone else's family gathering. The ceremony began with the presentation of colors and the national anthem. Dad was in a wheelchair in the front row, his injured leg extended, looking smaller in his dress uniform than I remembered. Other wounded soldiers sat beside him, some missing limbs, others bearing invisible wounds that showed only in the careful way they held themselves. General Stone took the podium with the bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention. She was impressive in a way that went beyond rank or uniform, carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every star on her shoulders. "We gather today," she began, "to honor the courage and sacrifice of the men and women who put their lives on the line for our freedom. But we also gather to recognize that behind every soldier stands a family. Parents, spouses, children, siblings who carry their own burden of service." As she spoke about sacrifice and honor, about the families who wait and worry and pray, I found myself thinking about Mom's funeral. How Dad had stood at attention in his dress blues while they folded the flag, even though Mom had been the one who died. How he'd presented that flag to me instead of to Jessica or Marcus, whispering that Mom would have wanted me to have it, because I understood what it meant to serve in ways that didn't require a uniform. The medal presentation began. One by one, soldiers were called forward to receive bronze stars, purple hearts, commendations for valor under fire. Each time, General Stone would read their citations with the kind of gravity that made the audience lean forward, hanging on every word. When Dad's name was called, Jessica sat up straighter. Robert began recording with his phone. Marcus whispered something to Amanda that made her smile proudly. Dad wheeled himself forward, and General Stone began reading his citation. Something about courage under fire, about selfless service, about actions that saved the lives of his fellow soldiers. I felt a surge of pride so strong it made my chest tight. After the medal was pinned to Dad's uniform, General Stone asked if his family would like to join him on stage for photographs. Jessica stood immediately, smoothing her dress and checking her hair. Marcus and Amanda were right behind her, followed by Robert, who was still recording everything. I remained in my seat. "Sarah," Jessica called softly from the aisle. "Come on." I shook my head. "I'm fine here." She walked back to my row, her smile tight with barely controlled frustration. "This is Dad's moment. We need to present as a united family." "You present however you want," I said. "I'll watch from here." Her eyes flashed with annoyance. "Sarah, don't be difficult. This is important." The word difficult echoed in the quiet auditorium. Several families in nearby rows turned to look at us, their conversations pausing. "I'm not being difficult," I said, but my voice came out smaller than I intended. "I just think Dad should be surrounded by a family he can be proud of." Jessica's expression shifted from annoyance to something that looked almost like pity. "Oh, Sarah, of course he's proud of you." But her tone suggested otherwise. It was the voice she used with difficult clients, with people who needed to be managed rather than reasoned with. "Come on," she said, reaching for my arm. "You're his daughter, too." "Am I?" The question came out before I could stop it. Jessica paused, her hand still extended. Around us, the whispered conversations had stopped entirely. People were openly staring now, watching the family drama unfold in real time. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jessica asked. I mean, when was the last time any of you introduced me as your sister without immediately explaining why I'm not like the rest of you? Jessica's face flushed slightly. Sarah, this isn't the time or place. When is the time and place? I asked, my voice getting stronger. When you're coordinating Dad's care without consulting me. When you're making decisions about his future like I don't exist. When you're telling everyone how worried you are about the family burden. The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. Jessica glanced around at the watching faces, clearly calculating how to minimize the scene I was creating. Nobody called you a burden, she said carefully. Really? Because I have a pretty clear memory of your exact words at Dad's birthday dinner. Marcus had noticed the commotion and was walking toward us, Amanda close behind. Their expressions were a mixture of concern and embarrassment. What's going on? Marcus asked quietly. Sarah's having a moment, Jessica said, as if I weren't sitting right there. A moment, I repeated. That's what we're calling it when I point out that you've spent 3 years treating me like a problem to be solved? Sarah, Marcus said in his most reasonable voice, maybe we could discuss this later. Dad's waiting for us. Dad's waiting for his real family, I said, standing up. The successful ones. The ones who make him proud. The ones who don't embarrass him in public. My voice had gotten louder without me realizing it. The entire section around us had gone silent, watching the Mitchell family implode in real time. You're embarrassing yourself, Jessica hissed. And us. Good, I said. At least now you know how it feels. That's when I saw General Stone looking in our direction from the stage. Dad was still in his wheelchair beside her, but he was turned around, trying to see what was happening in the audience. His face was creased with worry and confusion. Look what you've done, Jessica said, following my gaze. You've ruined Dad's moment. And she was right. Dad's medal ceremony, his moment of honor and recognition, was being overshadowed by his youngest daughter having a breakdown in the back of the auditorium. I should go, I said, grabbing my purse. Sarah, wait, Marcus said, but I was already pushing past him toward the aisle. Let her go, I heard Jessica say behind me. She needs to cool off. Quote. I made it halfway to the exit before General Stone's voice stopped me cold. Excuse me, miss, Sarah Mitchell? I turned around slowly. The entire auditorium was looking at me now. Hundreds of faces turned in my direction. General Stone had left the stage and was walking down the center aisle toward me, her expression unreadable. Yes, ma'am, I managed to say. She stopped about 3 feet away from me, studying my face with the same intense focus I'd seen in Dad's hospital room. I thought that was you, she said quietly. Then, louder, projecting her voice so the entire room could hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet someone very special. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure everyone could hear it. Jessica and Marcus were frozen in place, watching this unexpected development with growing alarm. 6 months ago, General Stone continued, this young woman saved my life and the lives of 12 other soldiers in Afghanistan. The auditorium erupted in confused murmurs. Dad's wheelchair creaked as he turned to face us fully, his eyes wide with shock, and something that looked like recognition finally clicking into place. I think there's been a mistake, Jessica said, stepping forward. My sister has never been to Afghanistan. She works in retail. General Stone's eyes never left my face. Is that what you told them? And in that moment, I realized that everything was about to change. That the secret I'd been carrying, the one thing in my life that mattered more than any job or degree or family approval, was about to be revealed to the people who had spent years calling me a burden. The people who were about to learn that while they were building their careers, I had been saving lives. The family meeting room at Walter Reed felt smaller with all of us crammed inside. Dad sat in his wheelchair near the window, the afternoon sun catching the bronze star now pinned to his hospital gown. He'd insisted on wearing mine during our private moment together. Jessica occupied the chair closest to him, her earlier composure completely shattered. Marcus paced near the far wall, unable to sit still. Robert and Amanda had excused themselves, claiming they needed to make work calls, but I suspected they simply couldn't handle the emotional intensity. The silence stretched between us like a chasm none of us knew how to cross. Finally, Jessica spoke, her voice hoarse from crying. Why Afghanistan? Of all the places you could have volunteered, why there? Quote, I looked out the window at the parking lot below, watching visitors come and go, normal families dealing with normal problems. After Mom died, I couldn't sleep, I said. Every night, I'd lie in bed thinking about all the things I couldn't save her from. The pain, the fear, the treatments that made her sicker instead of better. I felt useless. So you went to a war zone? Marcus asked, stopping his pacing. I went where people needed help, where maybe I could actually make a difference, instead of just watching someone I loved slip away. Jessica's hands were clenched in her lap. But you let us think you were falling apart. You let us believe you were just another casualty of Mom's death. I was falling apart, I said simply. Having PTSD doesn't make you weak, Jessica, it makes you human. But none of you wanted to see that. You wanted me to grieve on your timeline, to bounce back on your schedule. We were trying to help, Marcus said. No, you were trying to fix me. Like I was a problem with a solution instead of a person processing trauma. Dad cleared his throat softly. Sarah, why didn't you tell me? About Afghanistan? About what you were doing? I turned to face him, this man who'd raised me to be strong but somehow forgot to tell the rest of the family that strength comes in different forms. Because you were dealing with your own grief, Dad. Because every time I called you sounded so tired, so worried about everything, you didn't need another burden. You were never a burden, he said firmly. Wasn't I? When Jessica said it at your birthday dinner, you didn't contradict her. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Dad's face crumpled slightly. I should have, he whispered. God, Sarah, I should have defended you. I was so overwhelmed with the deployment coming up, with leaving you kids to figure things out without me. I thought maybe Jessica was right, that tough love was what you needed. Tough love, I repeated. Is that what we're calling it? Jessica finally looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. I need you to understand something, Sarah. When Mom got sick, I wanted to come home. I wanted to quit my job and take care of her myself. Then why didn't you? Because I'd just made a partner. Because Robert and I were trying to get pregnant and couldn't afford for me to be unemployed. Because, her voice broke. Because I was a coward. It was easier to let you handle everything and tell myself it was because you had more time, more flexibility. Marcus had stopped pacing entirely. I told myself the same thing. That you were better at the caregiving stuff. That Mom preferred having you there. But the truth is, I couldn't handle seeing her die. Every time I visited, every time I saw how sick she was getting, I wanted to run. So you did run, I said. You both did. And then you blamed me for not running with you. Yes, Jessica said simply, we did. And then when you started struggling afterward, instead of recognizing that we'd put an impossible burden on you, we decided you were weak. That you were using Mom's death as an excuse. An excuse for what? For being human? For not being successful like us, Marcus said quietly. For not having it all figured out. The honesty was brutal, but somehow cleansing. I need to tell you something else, Jessica continued. After the ceremony today, I called my office. I told them I was taking a leave of absence. I stared at her. Jessica, you don't have to. Yes, I do. For the first time in my life, I want to put family first. Real family, not the performance of family. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder of papers. These are the guardianship documents I was preparing, the ones that would have given me legal authority over Dad's care. She held them up, then slowly tore them in half. I don't want control, Sarah. I want to help, if you'll let me. Marcus moved closer to Dad's wheelchair. I've been thinking about something General Stone said. About how you ran toward danger while everyone else ran away. That's not just what you did in Afghanistan, that's what you've always done. What do you mean? You ran toward Mom's cancer when we ran away from it. You ran toward Dad's grief when we were too busy to notice it. You've been running toward the hard stuff your whole life while we've been running toward the easy stuff. Dad reached for my hand. Your mother knew, you know. Before she died, she told me that you were the strongest of all her children, that you had a warrior's heart. My eyes filled with tears. She never told me that. She didn't want you to feel pressured to be everyone's savior. She wanted you to know you had choices. His grip tightened. But she also knew that when it mattered, when people needed you, you'd show up. Just like you did for those soldiers. Just like you did for her. Just like you did for me. Quote, Jessica was crying again, but these tears looked different. Less self-pity, more recognition. I have to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer honestly. I waited. Can you forgive us? Not now, not today, but eventually? Can you forgive us for not seeing who you really were? The question was so vulnerable, so different from the confident lawyer I'd grown up with, that it took me a moment to process it. Jessica, I forgave you a long time ago. That was never the problem. Then what was? The problem was that you never saw me as someone worth forgiving. You saw me as someone who needed to earn forgiveness by becoming different, by becoming more like you. Marcus sat down heavily in one of the remaining chairs. So what happens now? How do we move forward from this? I looked around the room at these people who shared my DNA, my history, my loss, who had loved me imperfectly but consistently, who had hurt me deeply but not maliciously. We start over, I said. We start with the truth. All of it. No more hiding, no more pretending, no more trying to be what we think the others want us to be. What does that look like? Dad asked. It looks like me telling you that I've been seeing a therapist for PTSD, that I still have nightmares about Afghanistan and about watching Mom die. Some days I can barely get out of bed, and that's okay because healing isn't linear. I took a breath. It looks like Jessica admitting that success doesn't make you a better person, just a different person. That having money and status doesn't give you the right to judge how other people cope with trauma. Jessica nodded, tears still flowing. And it looks like Marcus acknowledging that avoiding difficult emotions doesn't make them go away, it just makes them someone else's problem. And me? Dad asked quietly. You get to stop trying to manage everyone's feelings. You get to be proud of all your children for different reasons. You get to love us without constantly worrying about whether we're living up to some impossible standard. The room fell quiet again, but this silence felt different, less charged, more thoughtful. There's something else, I said. I've been offered a position with Doctors Without Borders. Permanent staff, based in the U.S. but with regular deployments overseas. It's everything I've ever wanted to do. Sarah, that's incredible, Marcus said. It is, but it means I won't be available to be everyone's caregiver anymore. It means you'll all have to figure out how to support each other instead of expecting me to hold everything together. Jessica's face showed a flash of panic. But Dad's recovery is going to require all of us, not just me, not just you. All of us, working together, supporting each other instead of competing with each other. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. I love you all, but I'm done being your convenient solution to every problem. I'm done being the one who sacrifices so you don't have to. And I'm definitely done being called a burden by people who should be thanking me. Dad smiled through his tears. So what do we call you now? I pinned the bronze star to my sweater, feeling its weight like a reminder of who I'd always been. You call me Sarah. War hero, caregiver, survivor, and your daughter. All of it. The complicated, imperfect, strong, struggling truth of who I am. For the first time in years, that felt like enough. 6 months later, I stood in the departure lounge at Dulles Airport, adjusting the weight of my medical bag and checking my boarding pass one more time. Flight 847 to Geneva, where I'd catch a connection to Nairobi. My first official deployment as a Doctors Without Borders staff member, leading a team to establish a trauma center in a refugee camp. The airport buzzed with the usual chaos of international travel, but I felt calm in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Centered. Like I was finally moving in the direction I was meant to go instead of just reacting to whatever crisis needed managing. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Walked 50 feet today without the walker. Physical therapist says I'm ahead of schedule. Proud of you, warrior daughter. I smiled, typing back, proud of you too, old soldier. The recovery hadn't been easy for him, but having Jessica and Marcus genuinely involved instead of just offering long-distance advice had made all the difference. Jessica had surprised everyone by taking 6 months of unpaid leave to coordinate his care, and Marcus had moved back to Ohio temporarily to help with the day-to-day logistics. For the first time in years, they were functioning as a real family instead of just people who shared DNA and holiday dinners. Sarah Mitchell? A voice behind me made me turn. A young woman in scrubs was approaching, her eyes bright with recognition. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I saw your story on the news. About the ceremony at Walter Reed?" Quote, the media attention had been unexpected. General Stone's revelation had sparked a national conversation about invisible heroes, about the people who serve without uniforms or recognition. CNN had done a feature story, and somehow my phone number had gotten out. I'd received hundreds of messages from veterans' families, from caregivers who felt unseen, from people struggling with their own version of being called a burden. "You probably don't remember me," the woman continued, "but I was at Walter Reed that day. My brother was receiving a Purple Heart." She paused, gathering courage. "Your speech about being judged for grieving instead of supported through it really resonated with me. I've been taking care of my mom who has dementia, and my family keeps telling me I'm using her illness as an excuse for not having a real career." I set down my bag and gave her my full attention. "What's your name?" Linda Chen." "Linda, let me tell you something. Caring for someone you love while they slowly disappear is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Anyone who calls that an excuse doesn't understand the first thing about courage." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." After she walked away, I thought about all the similar conversations I'd had over the past months, speaking at veterans events, visiting support groups for military families, even testifying before a congressional subcommittee about the need for better mental health resources for caregivers. Jessica had been right about one thing during our hospital confrontation. My story had changed everything, but not in the way she'd expected. It hadn't erased the years of being seen as a failure. Instead, it had given those years meaning, context, a different framework for understanding what strength really looks like. My phone rang, Marcus's name on the screen. "Hey," I answered. "Just wanted to catch you before your flight. Amanda wanted me to tell you that Emma drew you a picture of you wearing your medal. She insists you're her favorite aunt now." I laughed. "Tell her the competition wasn't exactly fierce." "Actually, it was. Jessica's been spoiling her rotten trying to win the title back." His voice grew more serious. "Sarah, I need to say something before you go." "Okay." "I've been in therapy. Amanda suggested it after everything that happened at the hospital. I've been talking about Mom, about how I handled her death, about the guilt I've been carrying." Quote, Marcus. Let me finish. My therapist asked me to think about who I admired most in my life, and I realized it wasn't any of my engineering colleagues or business school professors. It was you. It's always been you. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. You taught me that showing up matters more than having answers, that love is a verb, not a feeling, that heroism isn't about grand gestures, it's about doing the right thing when it's hard and no one's watching. A boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, but I barely heard it. "I'm sorry it took me 30 years to see that," he continued, "but I see it now. And I'm going to make sure Emma and any other kids we have know about their Aunt Sarah, who runs toward danger instead of away from it." "Marcus," I said softly, "you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because for too long, we let the wrong story be told about who you are, and that stops now." After we hung up, I sat quietly in the departure lounge, watching planes taxi on the runway outside. I thought about Sarah, who had sat in this same airport 6 months ago, convinced she was nothing more than a burden to be managed, who had believed that love meant making yourself smaller so others could shine brighter. That Sarah had been brave too, in her own way. She'd survived being misunderstood by the people who should have known her best. She'd kept serving, kept caring, kept showing up even when she wasn't appreciated. She'd protected her family from their own guilt by absorbing their judgment. But this Sarah was different. This Sarah knew her worth wasn't determined by other people's perception of her. This Sarah understood that being called a burden by people who couldn't carry their own weight said more about them than it did about her. The boarding call for first-class passengers interrupted my thoughts. I gathered my things and stood in line, bronze star gleaming on my jacket lapel. The gate agent smiled when she saw it. "Thank you for your service," she said. "Thank you," I replied, but I was thinking about something General Stone had told me during our last conversation. "Service isn't just what you do in uniform," she'd said. "It's what you do when no one's looking, when there's no medal waiting, when the only reward is knowing you showed up for someone who needed you. As the plane lifted off from Dulles, I pressed my face to the window and watched the city shrink below me. Somewhere down there, Dad was learning to walk again with the full support of his children. Jessica was discovering that being needed was different from being in control. Marcus was teaching his daughter that strength comes in many forms. And somewhere down there, other families were having their own reckonings with the stories they'd told themselves about who mattered and who didn't. My phone had one last text from Jessica. "I'm proud to be your sister. Come home safe." I typed back, "I'm proud to be part of this family, finally." The plane banked toward the Atlantic, carrying me toward people who needed healing in places where healing seemed impossible. It was dangerous work, difficult work, the kind of work that most people would run from. But I wasn't most people. I was Sarah Mitchell, caregiver, warrior, survivor, and hero. I was the woman who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. I was the daughter who'd been called a burden until the day her family learned what she was really carrying. And I was finally, completely enough. 3 weeks later, Jessica would frame the newspaper clipping about my work in the refugee camp and hang it in her office next to her law degree. Marcus would name his second daughter Sarah. Dad would keep my bronze star on his bedside table and tell anyone who'd listen about his youngest daughter who saved lives for a living. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that the plane was heading toward people who needed help, and I was exactly where I belonged. For the first time in my life, being strong enough to carry other people's pain felt like a gift instead of a burden. And maybe that's what heroism really is. Not the absence of weight, but the willingness to carry it for someone who can't carry it alone. The family that once called me their greatest disappointment now tells everyone I'm their greatest pride, but the real victory isn't in changing their minds. It's in learning that my worth was never theirs to determine. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to be small in a world that needs you to be big. Sometimes love means taking up space instead of making room. And sometimes the people who call you a burden are really just afraid of how much weight you're capable of carrying. I carried their shame until they were strong enough to carry it themselves. I carried their guilt until they were brave enough to face it. I carried their fear until they learned that love isn't about being perfect, it's about showing up. But most importantly, I learned to carry myself with the same fierce protection I'd always offered everyone else. And that made all the difference. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.